Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Avero Advisors weekly live stream where we talk about all things digital transformation in the public sector. Today, I am joined by the very own Robert Kranovich, and we are going to talk about a topic that is very hot in the market right now. And that is, what is a realistic timeline for any digital transformation project? Lately, and Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, lately during any shortlist presentation or any conversation with a client, I feel like every year they ask us how we can do a readiness assessment in a shorter time frame. And it's like it's the same amount of work, right, for us, but how do we do it quicker? And do we have the resources to do it quicker? So I'm very excited about this topic today. If you are joining us, please let us know where you're joining from in the chat box. We love to hear from you guys, and please keep this interactive. We want to hear what your questions are, what thoughts you have, because this is a platform for us to educate you guys. So excited to be here. Robert, that was a long-winded introduction. Do you have anything to say before we dive right into this?
I do. Good morning, everyone. And this is a great topic because it's not actually the technology that's going to be limiting your timeline or dictating your timeline. And we'll dive into this in a little bit. Just to give like a high level taste of where this conversation's going to go. Change management is probably your biggest component. And that's probably what is going to be the biggest factor with the client. And in fact, I'll just dive right into that. So,
Yeah.
we're brought in early on to take a look at what you have, see if you, ideally, we're brought in at the point where we can look at your existing system and determine can it be re-leveraged or do you need to replace? But either of those have an aspect of change management, but nowhere near the momentous task of change management that comes with implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So the first couple of phases that we're usually brought in for, whether it's an IT strategic plan, we're just going to do requirements definition, or you have us do selection. There's change management there and there's education, but it's not to a great degree. Those I think we can compress as quickly as the client wants to go. And some clients are, they call us and say, hey, contract signed, let's start today. I'd like to have an RFP on the street in 30 days or
Yeah.
less. No problem. That can be done. Um, it's later when we start talking about implementation that we have to start taking into consideration not only staff's availability to do an 18-month implementation. Do we need to shrink it to 12 months? I'm working with a client today that 14 months was optimal, not because they wanted to take 14 months to do financials, but because of their busy season with budgeting and financial statements. They had to stagger it that way. But what comes into play in that, again, is the change management aspect. And so when you're doing something over a longer period of time, whether it's a 9-month or 12-month or 15-month implementation, that's a lot of enthusiasm that you have to keep going with your end users and get them involved. We'll go into that in a little more detail, but right now I really think that's the delineation. It used to be takes a while to get through contracting, and then it takes a while to get the stakeholders available, and then it takes a while to get everyone scheduled so you can do discovery.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays that can be done quicker, or in a lot of cases with the tools that we have, we can shortcut that by putting together a good set of requirements right up front and then just vetting it with your staff, helping to focus on the type of software that you're looking for in terms of the categories that large ERP, medium-sized ERP, smaller company. We can get to those decisions a heck of a lot quicker now than we could 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made some good points. I do think change management is a key aspect of any implementation, right? But I also think what clients have to realize is the level of involvement that they want from us. That's been a big key determining factor, right? When we price for implementation, sometimes we give three different options, right? Do you want the Cadillac version where we are full PMO and managing the whole thing? Do you want a hybrid, or do you want more of like an IV&V, just complete oversight, right? And so when you guys are thinking about implementation of an ERP software, you need to understand the differences of the levels of the consultancy that's overseeing the project. So what are your thoughts on that, Robert? I think there's a big misconception in the market of, how involved we can be versus, how not involved we can be, and we can just be this oversight partner. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a lot of times clients don't actually know what they're going to need for implementation, and we're pretty honest with folks as well. You're not going to know exactly what you're going to need until you've selected and you've done contract negotiation. You can also, when you have your short list and you have your two or three finalists, you can probably get a pretty good indication then if we take the time to do that and really research that. But when you're 4 or 5 months away from that short list, it's very difficult for the client to go, well, this is exactly what I want. This is what I'm looking for with Avero. The baseline that they have to have with us is we're the ones taking you through discovery. We're taking you through selection. We're taking you through contract negotiations. We're taking you through requirements, definitions. I know what you need. I spent time with you as a client. So when we start going into implementation, it's a lot easier for us to marry our experience with our understanding with a client and hold the software vendors accountable, which is the shortcut to what a lot of this is. It's you're going to spend a lot of money with a software company, much more than you're going to spend with us.
That's right.
On a system that has a lot of liability, that has a lot of political capital implications, has a lot of legacy implications for a lot of people, and you're placing a majority of the risk with this software vendor and this implementer. Someone has to be there to keep them on track every day to go, oh, okay, they want to tell us that you're going to need more money in this particular area because you need to delay go live by a month. That may be true, but I need them to prove to me where their cost suddenly means $300,000 just to delay go live for a month. And the software vendors, again, I beat up on software vendors quite a bit, but again, their path is of least resistance. They just want to get their resources on the project, churn and burn, get it implemented, and then move on to the next client. That's how they make their money. So delays, they like to automatically talk about costs, which is not an unreasonable thing to do, but it needs to be a fair cost, and it can't just be, throw a number out there like $300,000 just to delay go live. And again, I always go back to shared fate. I like sharing the fate of my clients. I'm there to make the client successful. If the client's not successful, then Avero is not successful, and it doesn't matter. So then I have to be truly invested in their particular fate. Software companies don't necessarily share that same fate as well. They're concerned with protecting their liability and their financial situation, which again is a normal part of being business. But in our case specifically, I'm there to be your advocate. I'm there to make sure that what you're paying for gets delivered properly, that there are no surprises, and that you come out with the goal you were looking for from the very beginning. I don't want to retire from this organization until I leave it in much better shape than it was on this existing system. Things like that. My goal is to help protect all those goals with you as well as the financial and the liability aspects.
Yep. No, you make a great point. And I love that you brought up our vendor friends. We really, we're not trying to throw you guys under the bus. We love you guys. We love the relationships that we've built with you all. I think one of the biggest challenges we have when we're talking about implementation is, especially if we're responding to an RFP or trying to build out a scope of work before we've even been, on site with the client until we really know. One of the biggest misconceptions is, implementation in terms of what it's going to take resource wise, because we haven't even gotten to that point yet. They don't know which vendor they're going to choose. And we have to include caveats in our budgets and timelines that say, hey, this all depends on what the vendor is going to do, right? And can you walk us through that, Robert, and why that's so important and why we can't just, we can make assumptions, but it's hard to do. So talk about that. Talk about knowing what the vendor is going to do and why that's important when building out a timeline or a budget for implementation.
Yeah. So, and what I spoke of earlier truly is the baseline of what you need. So there are other things on top of it, as well as in some cases we're doing staff augmentation. We're also helping them button up their support on their current system because again, just because you're going to a new ERP system, you have to live with your existing one for at least another year once you make that to go to the new one, sometimes even longer. And then you got to figure out data conversion, which is another area that we know pretty well what the vendors are going to offer, what price tag they're going to put in front of you. And so we head off those conversations as early as possible so that the client has a good aspect in understanding what they need with data conversion. Otherwise, vendors are going to go, okay, if you need 10 years, we can do that. That's going to be $2.5 million to do that conversion. So a lot of things that a lot of people would think you wait for the vendor to do, you can do with us. Chart of account discussions, public records retention, specifically what you're going to keep with your accounting data, the state of what that data is in. What are you going to do with that system once you convert to the new one? Are you going to keep the old system around for just data warehousing, or have it just available so that if there is some data that needs to be pulled there, it's almost like a security blanket. We've talked about this in other situations. People always think they need to bring over a lot more data than they actually do, but a lot of clients are always like, okay, I get it, we're not going to move it, we're not going to convert it and put it in the new system, but I need to know it's there, and I need to know that if the state comes and says, I need to see the contract on this teacher from 27 years ago, I'm going to be able to produce that some way, somehow, either in the old system or because the data in the old system is being stored and maintained someplace so that I can get that. So there's a lot of aspects that we know of, especially with contract negotiations now. We know vendors are going to push back very hard about their liability, and they're going to want to write the contract so that there almost is no liability by the software vendor.
Right.
And again, that's a normal part of doing business with folks, but that's also the area that's been the biggest sticking point in our last couple of negotiations. Price was secondary. The fact that the software vendor and the implementer they were working with, the one they had selected, seemed to be going, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm just going to delineate your liability from mine, and I'm going to make sure I'm protected. And I think legal departments mean to do that at software vendors. I don't think sales, support, and implementation means that, but that's how it comes across to the client in negotiations. So understanding the perspective the client's going to start with, having those conversations with our client before we go into negotiations and let them know, are you solid on your liability? What do you think you can take to your board, and what can you not take to your board? And let's just lay out a baseline of where we're going to start on these contract negotiations and get a lot of that done. So even before we start planning out implementation, there's tons of things that we know the vendor's going to do and is going to want to do and is not going to want to do, that we can start that conversation with the client early and get those answers.
Yeah, let's talk about go live, right? This is something that we talk about all the time. You know, a lot of times our vendors like to set a go live date, and we encourage our clients to think from a holistic view and say, hey, what does go live mean to you and your organization? Does it mean that, you know, all the lights turn on and you know you have a power on for your solution, or does it mean that, you know, you're running checks in the new system, you're onboarding in the new system? You know, what does go live mean to you, and not letting your vendor determine what that means for you. So can you talk a little bit about go live dates, Robert, and how that might affect your timeline?
Oh yeah, so there's always that balance between go live has to be pretty well nailed down, because again, in these larger organizations, there are periods of time where HR is not going to be available, especially if they're an entity that does hiring seasonally or at certain times of the
Right.
year. They're going to need to be able to dedicate a lot of time for that 2, 3, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, even position control and building out the budgeting that you have to do to get approved, so then you can go out to the hiring season, your next hiring season, and hire. These are all day ranges that there's a compromise that has to be made. Either it's the client saying, no way you can have my staff for these 3 weeks. Or it's going to be the software vendor going, if we are going to be able to make it to UAT at this particular point, so the go live isn't threatened, I am going to need some of your staff time, but let me tell you what I'm going to need, and let's see if we can make that work out. So some cases that go live date is still a little soft, and it can be part of the planning process to figure out when exactly that's going to be. Other cases, we've walked into clients and they're like, no, end of the year, I have to be off the system. The support is done. It's run out. There's no one else that's going to do anything for it. And I can't live with an unsupported ERP system. I have to make a go live by 12/31 of the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to vary. And so, of course, the factors involved with that are going to vary to some degree as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be able to stretch things out a little bit, look at the cost implication of doing that,
Yeah.
but then also making sure the client doesn't feel like we're going to lose momentum and that we feel
Right.
like we're not going to lose momentum by turning a go live into 2 years down the road, which is,
That's right.
that seems like an eternity when you're
Hmm.
dealing with a system that right now is not doing what you need it to do. So it's going to vary from client to client. And it's also going to be cost factor is usually the biggest one. We can give
Oh,
you
yeah.
lots of time to do the project, but it's going to cost you a lot more to do it.
Hmm.
And we have all these pressures from your staff, from the fact that your existing system doesn't work, that's going to go into play on those. So those conversations can be very straightforward. They can also be couched in a lot of nuance that we have to walk people through until we get the answer that we need and that makes
Hmm.
sense. And so that process, in some cases, on some projects, that's a continuing discussion on
Yeah.
go live is to what is actually going to be the definition of when you're ready to go,
Hmm.
and at what point is that actually going to make sense for you to do.
Right, right. You touched on it a little bit, but let's talk about clients who we work with who their current systems have a sunset date, right? And so we're trying to do a lot of work again in a shorter time frame to combat that because maybe a client, wants to have a new system selected before their sunset date. Walk us through how we go about. Educating clients, helping clients define what the best approach is and how that may affect the overall timeline for implementation.
Yeah, a lot of it is vetting the realities of that situation.
Hmm.
Your system might no longer have support by the end of the year, and diving into, okay, what does that mean? Is there an option of support there, but you declined to do it because of the cost, or because you wanted to move to the new system as quickly as possible? Is this an absolutely drop dead date? There will be no customer support for your existing system past this particular date.
Hmm.
Even then, finding solutions. Are there other folks who are willing to support the system for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and just be able to keep it going for that period of time? Then that weighs into the decision of, okay, then let's go back to timeline. And is 9 months realistic to do an entire discovery, selection,
Right.
contract negotiation, and implementation? In most cases, no.
No.
Not always no, but in most cases, it's no. It can
Hmm.
be done, but you also have to look at the battleship that you're trying to steer. If this is a county government with 600, 700, 2,000, 3,000 employees, that's a heck of a lot of change management,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you're just not able to steer the ship that quickly in those cases. Some clients, if it's a subcomponent of ERP or it's a module in ERP and you're just replacing that particular system, yes, you can do that on a shorter timeline. But then that also invites the discussion of, do you want best of breed or do you want integrated ultimately for your ERP? Because just solving this little piece of it now could make it more difficult for what you want to do with ERP later on down the road. So
That,
these are all the little nuance and caveat situations that get involved in these decisions.
so, what would your advice be to that client who may have a sunset date approaching or in the near future? How do they go about planning for that, or what advice would you give to them?
Make sure that those dates are real, and run that down. Just don't take someone's word for it. Of the software vendor said they're no longer going to support our current system, as of Q1 2026. And does that mean that the software vendor is still willing to support you, but you have to move to their SaaS environment and do a conversion there? Does that mean the software company is not going to support that particular brand anymore whatsoever? And make sure you know the details of that, because you need to know what your options are. And the options can include, like what I also said, there are other companies, there are third parties that would be willing to support that platform on a month by month or quarter by quarter basis, if that's what you need to be able to plug the gap.
Hmm.
And especially, I would step back and ask yourself, is that the only thing that is driving my need to go live on this particular date?
Hmm.
And vet those and get your options on that. And you're probably going to have to reach out to someone, likely us, to help figure out what those options are. But again, I love handing out free advice. If that's on your mind and you need some firmer decisions or you need some clarity on that, just talking to us for an hour, we can walk you through a number of scenarios that will help determine, is that a real drop dead date, or is that a date that, yes, there's implications, but there's ways to overcome that and change that date, and then take a little bit of pressure off of your budget and your staff to have to do this immediately in this fiscal year.
Yeah, yeah. The point is you have options, right? I think vendors a lot of times try to scare our clients into, hey, this is going away. you've got to do something now, right? But you do have options, and as Robert said, please reach out to us. We're happy to decipher through those options for you. So I'm going to go to the comments, Robert. Robert has is on site with the client, guys. So we're going to have to wrap this up shortly. So I want to make sure I get to the comments before we wrap up. And again, if you have questions after we do wrap up, please feel free to continue to comment. So Bent is joining us today. He says, "Hey, Robert, nice to see you again. My question is, what do you do when everything is running very smooth and we don't need modernization?"
There's two. You need to retire because you become a dinosaur. Or two, you need to look at what all your vulnerabilities are, because modernization, and especially the security aspect of modernization, really is carried from moment to moment. Because your public expectations honestly get carried from moment to moment. That's why you have an elected board that gets to react to what your public wants you to do and your citizens want you to do. They're the ones who are able to take this topic that a week ago no one even knew was going to be the leading topic at this public meeting, and they're able to go, you know what, we're going to address this. We're going to address this first and foremost during this meeting, and we're really going to vet this with the public who's here to find out more about this or be able to speak. So when you start to think, oh, good, we spent some money, we got some really interesting stuff, we got it all turned on, it looks really cool, I'm done here.
Yeah.
You're a dinosaur, because your public's expectations evolve a lot quicker than what the technology does. So the modernization is a constant.
It is.
It's a constant drumbeat, and I think a lot of people just they know that. I think a lot of our clients, our sponsors especially, are savvy enough to know that. But then the question just becomes, well, then how the heck do I stay on top of that if I know it's going to be a continuing struggle, or it's going to be a continuing project to keep modernization going? But it is. The moment you find one-time dollars, you buy a bunch of stuff, you turn it on, that's going to last you maybe a year, year and a half, and then it's going to age, and you're going to be right back where you were before, when you were in the bust cycle of technology, when you couldn't get money, you couldn't get motivation from folks, and you have to be able to sustain a lot of this and see what makes sense for you financially and resource-wise going forward.
Yeah, don't get complacent. Don't be a dinosaur. Things are constantly evolving and changing, and especially in the technology space. Just look at how quickly AI has what's the word I'm trying to say? I mean, we were just using chatbots,
Oh yeah, leapfrog is the word I would use.
Leapfrog, yes.
It literally
Sorry.
leapfrogs over itself over the
Yes.
course of a day or a couple of weeks.
Yes, absolutely. So Brian is joining us today, our newest member of the team. And RK, I'll let you sort of introduce Brian. But Brian says, I often find the selection process is a learning experience for the client, not just in terms of software vendors they're looking at, but also finding out realistically how engaged their team can be and what kind of commitment they're able to make throughout an implementation. And that will be one of the biggest factors in the timeline.
Yeah, so Brian, super savvy project manager, and glad to have him on our team. And this question is another example as to why we love having Brian on the team, because yeah, he's exactly right. There's this aspect of ERP is not real until situations like this start to occur. And let me phrase that a little bit better. So we don't like our new system. We want to be on a new system. We've got the funding, we've got the political capital, we've got the buy-in from the organization. Let's go. At that point, it's still not real. So when you start diving into the details, like he's talking about with selection, and you start planning out implementation, it starts to become really real to staff.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that's where initially there might not be some resistance. Now there might be some resistance from folks who are like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to learn a new system, which honestly, a lot of people, that's what they worry about. Is this going to change my job? Is this going to eliminate my job? Am I not going to be able to keep up with the modernization within my department, even though I'm the department leader? But now I have my own insecurities about how this is going to play out. If we're going to dive into the details as to what we need for software, is this going to expose a weakness or vulnerability I didn't know about? These are the things that start to become real for the client as you start actually getting into the nuts and bolts of selection, and even by implementation as well. And it's classic. Even when you get to the point of the kickoff or the implementation, everyone's attitude in the room changes. They're excited, but they're also like, "Oh wow,
Terrified.
this is not just something we've been talking about for 3 years. This is actually going to start, and this is actually going to require a lot of my time. And in a year or less, I'm going to be live on a new system." And so, coaxing them through that reality and through that step is part of the change management process as well.
Which is mind-boggling to me. These clients, no offense, but the clients who don't use a consultant or an independent advisor to hold their hand through this implementation process. They're just working directly with the vendor. I can't imagine how mind-boggling and terrifying that could be as well. Do you have thoughts on not using a consultant, like a small commercial? But in terms of timeline, I can't imagine. I mean, I think that's why a lot of implementations fail. There's no third party PMO to hold those vendors accountable. So, what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll wrap up, RK.
Yeah, one of the ways I look at it is you have two distinct silos. Then you've got the client who's in their siloed world. This is all they've known for the past 5 years, in some cases 25, 30 years they've been with the organization. Sometimes they've had the system around for that long, their existing one. So they're in a silo of they just know their world, and their world includes not having ERP modernization come along every 5 years or every 10 years. So some people have never even been through an ERP selection and an implementation. They're sitting in their silo. The other silo across the way is the software vendor and the implementer for that. They're a little less siloed because they have broad customer experience, but they also know only a few ways of doing things because that's what fits their particular system. This is what fits their standard timeline. And again, they're going for path of least resistance.
Yeah.
It's not that they're going, let's just get them live and get our money and run. They're going, this is how we know if we implement it on this exact way, we know with 100% certainty that this will work well and you guys will be live. But they're going to be ignoring a lot of other factors involved in this client sitting in their silo. And so you need that person in the middle who's able to bring both the client experience and working with the clients and understanding that client, because again, we usually have been working with them for several months, and then marrying our experience and our expertise in implementing a variety of systems in a variety of situations, especially with one software vendor in particular. There could be numerous variations on that particular implementation. And so we are able to bridge those silos and prevent it from being, this person speaks this language, the software vendor goes, I don't understand what that means, so let me just reiterate with you that we're going to go live on March 1st. It's the lack of communication can become very out of control in those situations because the client doesn't know what they should be asking the software vendor, and the software vendor is just going to give you the standard answer that they need to be able to get going and get this implemented. That's why you need a third party in there to help you and be your advocate.
Yes, and in the past, we've seen those who do not use a third-party consultant end up spending way more money in the long run, if you can imagine that. And maybe that's a topic for next time. But guys, we're going to wrap up today. Thank you, Robert, for joining me today, especially since you're on site. Good luck with your meetings. And if you're just joining us or if you're watching this later, make sure you go out and download our 2025 report. We talk about all things digital transformation, tips, tricks, things to consider. And we're constantly updating that because, again, our dream is to be the trusted advisor in this space as an agnostic partner for our clients. So, Robert, thank you. And we'll see you guys next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.